How to Fast-Track Mortgage Industry Integrations, Part 3 of 3, explores the proof of concept and shows how the API Toolkit transforms business operations.
Awesome. All right, on to the next slide. Thanks, Megan. Identifying REST operations. So in creating your API specification using the API Toolkit, you've seen so far how we can take these models and make a constraint on an interface or a contract when speaking to other systems. Our next part of that is identifying the operations and the URIs that would be used and putting it all together. For this, the FIPS Code API exploratory effort looked at how we could follow RESTful conventions and the pros or cons of using it and taking an opinionated approach in this aspect. So we are not necessarily creating an entity, we're really reading data. But as we dug deep into this and looked at different use cases, we've seen best practices where a post would work better. One is specifically is not exposing MPI data over a URI or URL. So given that and the number of parameters that could be used in reading the data, we chose to use post. So in the next section, I'll show you how we implemented that. Cool. All right. So talking about defining the Open API specification, we have the models and we're going to glue this all together. Let's take a look at how that happens in the next video. All right, so we have our error, we have our request response. Now we're going to start going through the process of adding it all together in the API specification. So we see right now using this handling that there's no path defined. So what we want to do is declare our path. I'm copying and pasting this over to save some time. So we have path FIPS loan limit. This was decided as a group on how to create it. And we're going to use the HTTP verb post. Yep. So as we go through this process, this is just following Open API specification. The IDE that I'm using is giving me a little bit of help. Post said that it didn't have any responses. Now the error went away. We created a response. And you see we're starting to map this to the components that we created earlier. So we see the error message goes away. The default response is 200 OK, and we map it to our response. Now, in a perfect world, that's all we need. But in reality, we need to be able to handle if there's an error. So we start defining errors that we see in real world scenarios. There's a bad request. Mapping it to the error object. And then if there's an authentication failure, 401. And then if something really bad happened, a 500, more than likely getting a string response back instead of an object. Awesome. So we now have our Open API specification declared. No errors listed. Cool. All right, so before we hop into the next video, I just want to recap. Going from the BA template, I'm looking at time, going from the BA template, gathering the requirements, we're able to create the request, response, and error models off of what we gathered. It showed getting those files from the MISMO website, combining the YAML files into request and response objects, and then defining the API specification operations around them. We talked a little bit about typing, further restricting those types. When you use toolkits, or for our exercise, we're able to use those type restrictions on models in .NET to use data annotations. So when that data comes across the wire, right at the edge of our API interfaces, we're able to tell and respond back with an error. So what I'm going to demo in the next slide is using an opinionated way. I use .NET and a couple other frameworks, but just using a random tool out there in the community called NSWAG. Going to copy in the API specification, going to generate a controller off of it, the models, and just do a quick implementation of showing it working with our secret sauce. I won't demo, or my secret sauce, which is essentially gluing an API for address normalization and importing the FIPS database from CSV. So let's take a look. Great. So this is a real short overview, just copying over the Open API spec, literally what you've seen just completed in the last video. What we see is a JSON representation. And this is, again, opinionated approach. There's many different tools out there. I don't recommend this one over any other one. It's just one that I used for this demo. We see that it generates the controllers based off of all the information we have declared and the enumerations, the data types, etc. So given this, I'm going to hop into my C# project that is completed and take a look at the controller that was imported. Little blurry here, guys. And what it did in this case is it generated a partial controller. So I'm able just to layer on my functionality, my secret sauce, which is a service that calls Smarty Streets in this instance to normalize the API or to normalize the address if you need to, and does a FIPS lookup, given the database, the lending limit, and returns back the results or an error. Cool. So using some boilerplate code for .NET, let's go ahead and run a transaction through. We see a response. Cool. And let's look at a negative test case. So county name is something that is identified as being required. And you see error message and error response listed. And let's run it through one more time, adding the property back in. We see our response.
So you're convinced that the Mismo API Toolkit can streamline the development process for mortgage APIs. Where do you go from here? Well, Mismo has a variety of resources to assist you as you leverage the API Toolkit. Mismo has published 2 articles that are available to the public. They were authored with your software engineering team in mind. The first, Getting Started with the Mismo API Toolkit, walks through the process of creating a schema for an API that transmits basic borrower information using the Mismo API Toolkit. The second article discusses defining relationships. It builds on the use case introduced in the first article. It illustrates how to define relationships between API objects. Be on the lookout for a third article that will discuss defining extensions or custom properties in the Mismo-based API. If you're more of a visual learner, we've got you covered. There are 3 webinars available to Mismo members inside Mismo Connect. The first, Introduction to the Mismo API Toolkit for General Audiences. This webinar provides an overview of web APIs, the benefit of standardization, and how the API Toolkit delivers value in your API journey. There's also the API Toolkit for Technical Audiences, which is a technical discussion of the API Toolkit and the process of using it to create a mortgage API. And finally, there's using the Mismo API Toolkit to build your own FIPS code lending API webinar. And this one demonstrates the steps to define and implement an actual use case from the perspective of a business analyst and a software developer. There are also Mismo standard APIs available to the public. We have the FIPS code API, the mortgage insurance activation API, as well as a mortgage insurance estimated rate quote API that are available to both members and non-members. These APIs were built using the API Toolkit. Each API implements the Mismo standard and is ready for service providers to implement in production. The downloads include the Open API YAML files, sample requests and responses, and the implementation guide for that specific API. Work is in progress right now to standardize a title precinct API, so be on the lookout for that as well. MEG 45 is another resource available to the public. Both members and non-members have access, and it provides engineering guidelines for representing the MISMO model using the Open API specification. Finally, there is the MISMO API Committee of Practice. Our meeting schedule's on the screen here. It provides you with the opportunity to connect with other professionals in the industry, share insights, and tackle common challenges related to implementing mortgage APIs. Active participation will enable you to stay up to date with the latest standards, products, and guides provided by MISMO. And you'll also have the opportunity to shape the future of standardized mortgage APIs by sharing your use cases and personal experiences. As you continue to innovate using MISMO and the API Toolkit, we invite you to actively participate in this community. Visit the MISMO website to join the API Community of Practice, access additional resources, and share your feedback. Thanks for watching. Keep innovating, stay connected, and let's shape the future of mortgage technology together.